Alright, so we are going to be in Luke 22 and John 13, so we're going to bounce around a little tiny bit, so mark both those places today. Alright, so last week we saw the second half of Tuesday. Okay, Jesus was teaching, and we also discovered that Judas, one of the 12, is involved in the plot with the religious leaders against Jesus. So Wednesday is now past and Thursday arrived. So we are at Thursday morning preparation day. It's kind of interesting the way that God times everything with Thanksgiving coming. We're going to talk about a meal today. We're going to talk about the Last Supper. Okay? So we're going to start in Luke 22, and we're going to start in verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. So Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat it." They said to him, "Where will you have us prepare it?" And he said to them, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house that he enters, and tell the master of the house, 'The teacher says to you, where is the guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And he will show you a large upper room furnished. Prepare it there." And they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Okay? So, where are Jesus and his disciples?
In the upper room?
No, they're in Bethany.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Remember, they're bouncing back and forth between Jerusalem and Bethany, right? Jerusalem's really overcrowded. They're staying in Bethany. So he sends John and Peter into Jerusalem. Okay? He's saying, "I'm going to eat the Passover with y'all in Jerusalem," which I'm sure Martha, if she overheard that, she would probably have been furious, right? Because she's probably preparing the Passover for her family. Jesus is making other plans, okay? So he tells John and Peter, "I want you to go into the city, and out of 1,000,000 people, I want you to find a man who's carrying a pitcher of water," okay? Doesn't give them the guy's name, doesn't have a meetup spot.
I wonder how many other men were carrying pitchers of water.
Can I tell you how many? 0. Because men at that time did not carry water in a pitcher. If men were carrying water, it was in an animal skin. Only women carried water in a pitcher. So they had to find the guy, but he would be the only man in the city carrying water in a pitcher. So it was a very distinct sign. It was not just the first guy you see carrying it. It was the only man in Jerusalem who would be carrying it. Okay? So Jesus sends them on a little scavenger hunt. Okay, so remember, we've got Peter, the oldest of them, and John, probably the youngest. Okay, so they have teamed up, and they're going to go on a scavenger hunt in Jerusalem. They're going to find one man in 1,000,000 people who's carrying a stone pitcher with water in it. Okay? So he tells them, "Follow him and tell his master, the teacher is requesting this." He didn't say Jesus, okay, because it's probably going to tip people off of where he is. Not only is the crowd looking for him, but the religious leaders are looking for him. Judas is looking for him. Okay? So, he says, "Go and do this, and you're going to find this large upper room, and it's already going to be furnished, already going to be clean, already going to be ready, but I want you two to prepare the meal." So he sends John and Peter on this mission to prepare the meal for Passover so that the rest of them can then come and celebrate the Passover together. Okay? So, he's got some final lessons for his disciples, and he is going to have this final meal with them before he gets handed over. Well, Peter and John, probably doubting a whole lot, walk from Bethany to Jerusalem. They end up finding the guy. They go to his master's house, and the master says, "Sure, I've done all of this preparation. You can have it. It's yours. If the teacher needs it, he can have it." Okay? And they prepare the Passover meal. Okay? Well, the Passover meal was typically eaten on the evening of the 14th. Okay? So the evening of the 14th was when they typically ate it. Okay? So we're at whatever day the 14th ended on, that was when they ate. Normally starting around 6 p.m. because when the sun goes down, that starts their next day into the 15th. So when somebody asks you, when is Passover, it's really kind of hard for us Americans, because which do you say? Do you say the 14th or the 15th when Passover is? Well, technically, it's the night between the 14th and the 15th. Because when did the Spirit pass over? At night. Okay? So technically, Passover happens between the night, between the 14th and the 15th. Okay? This is actually the previous day. So this is actually the 13th. Okay? So they are going to have their Passover dinner technically the night before. So 24 hours before. Okay? So we are in the evening of the 13th. Okay? So Jesus sends them on their little quest to go get everything ready, and they're going to have dinner that night into the morning of the 14th. Okay? Everyone else in all of Jerusalem will be having their Passover the next night. Okay? Alright. So, it is interesting when we put all of the gospel pieces together of this meal that the lamb is not mentioned specifically. Now, we assume that it's there because Jesus tells them, go prepare the Passover meal. Okay? And what was included in the Passover meal was a roasted lamb that was slain in the temple. So it had to be pure, had to be clean, had to be slain properly by the priest. And then they would take it home and they would roast it. Okay, so roast lamb. Unleavened bread, which was very specific, had to represent that they had to leave quickly. Okay, so they did not wait for their sourdough to rise. Okay, it was quick, fast stuff that we can make really quick. Bitter herbs, which were general, you could pretty much get whatever herbs you wanted as long as they were considered bitter, mixed with either salt water or oil, depending on what you wanted, and wine. That's it. That's the whole meal. That's the original Exodus Passover meal. Now, as the tradition went on for years and years, and now 2,000 years later, they've added symbols. But the original Passover meal was only roasted lamb, unleavened bread, herbs in either salt water or oil, and wine. That was it. That was all they ate for that night. Okay? So, by not stating that a lamb was there, it kind of points the gospel writers to Jesus being the Passover lamb. There's pictures and foreshadowing that he's doing. But they probably did eat the lamb. Did eat a lamb. Alright, so they all leave Bethany and come to Jerusalem and into the house. Okay? Let's jump over to John 13 and find out what happens when they're there. Okay? So we now have all 12 disciples and Jesus. We're in this borrowed house. We're in the upper room, and everything is prepared and ready to feast.
Jenifer, was there any cultural relevance to them having the Passover a night early?
Not culturally speaking, but what we're going to talk about is that Jesus knows what's going to happen. Because the religious leaders are expecting to kill him here. Remember that. But he knows everything's going to go down here.
Okay.
So in not wanting to miss this, he then makes it the night before. So no one else in Jerusalem is actually eating their Passover.
Would the disciples have been confused as to why they were having the Passover then?
Yes, but they probably didn't realize that they were actually having the Passover. You could feast 7 days up to this, and some families would. They would have like a family feast, and then they would also have their Passover with extended relatives. So that's probably what they're assuming this is that we're going to feast together as one of the Passover nights, and then we're going to have the capital T Passover the next night. Okay, so that's probably what they would have expected is that this is probably just, he wants to get together with the guys and have a meal, like Friendsgiving, okay? Very much like that, okay? You have Thanksgiving and then you also have Friendsgiving, okay? So that's probably their Friendsgiving, okay? Very, very on topic for our matter, right? Right, so they're going, okay, we're just gonna have a Passover meal, not the Passover meal, okay? That's a great question. All right, so John 13, verse 1. Now before the feast of Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During the supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Okay, so another very odd thing happens. John here makes it very clear that Jesus loved his disciples. All of them. All 12 are present, including Judas, okay? He led them. He taught them. He cared for them. He protected them. He loves them to the uttermost. Every single one of them, including Judas. But knowing what Judas is about to do, okay, Jesus decides to get up from the meal in the middle of the meal, which doesn't happen, in order to wash their feet. Now, typically, a feet washing would be done before the meal, because when you come into somebody's home and you're walking through what they're walking through in basically bare feet, because their sandals are kind of open sandals, like a piece of leather with some straps over it, okay? You're walking through everything, all the time, back and forth between Bethany and here, and through animal waste and human waste and all kinds of different things. You would wash your feet before you started eating, right? Like we go wash our hands before we start eating. These guys just sit down and start eating. And Jesus goes, all right, teachable moment, right? Our teacher, okay, fellas, I'm going to teach you here. And we can see from John's description that John is fully remembering everything that happened that night. It's very clear in John's mind, all these different pieces that were coming together. He remembers every detail, okay? Now, this was an extreme act of humility and servanthood for Jesus because there was a Jewish law. Of course, there's a Jewish law about everything, right? We have a Jewish law here. A teacher could not demand his disciple to wash his feet. Now, if the disciple wanted to do it freely, they were allowed to do it freely, but a teacher could not demand for a disciple to wash his feet. And it was absolutely unheard of for a teacher to wash his students' feet. Unheard of, okay? What's more dynamic about this whole scene, that should be enough. But Luke 22:24 tells us what the 12 disciples were talking about as they were walking into dinner. This is their conversation in Luke 22:24. A dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. They are heading to the Passover feast with their Messiah, who will be dead in the next 24 hours. And they're fighting about who's going to be greatest in the kingdom again.
Stop.
Yeah. So they still couldn't drop that argument. They were fighting with each other about this argument. Okay? So very awkwardly, Jesus, knowing what's on their hearts and minds, says, all right, fellas, I got a lesson for you. And he gets up, and he would take off his outer garment. They were talking about several layers, and he would take out his outer garment, he would wrap a towel around himself, and he would bend down and clean their feet. And make sure that they're every single, that's 24 feet if y'all aren't counting, okay? 24 feet that he's cleaning by himself, washing and cleaning by himself, including Judas's feet. Jesus' feet don't get washed in this picture. Do you know why? Because Mary had already washed his feet. He was good. Even though he's still walking through stuff. Physically, he's still dirty. And he knew his feet were already taken care of. He's going to show his disciples something. So their smelly, stinky feet, he's washing and cleaning and getting prepared in the middle of dinner, okay? And he finishes, okay? And the disciples are now, we didn't do things right here. Because I'm sure some of them would have been okay to wash Jesus' feet. But if they did, they would have been opened up to being responsible for everyone at the table. Okay? So if, somebody did, okay, Jesus, I'm going to wash your feet, it was then that person's responsibility to wash everyone. That's where they drew the line. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to lower myself and do that. Jesus did. Okay? He knew his actions were going to speak louder because he doesn't teach first. He teaches through actions first. Then he teaches with his words. Okay? He's going to teach these very still proud and arrogant disciples what humility actually looks like. You don't just say it, you show it. Okay? So, he gets to Simon Peter, right? Simon Peter has a problem with this. Simon Peter has a big problem with this. He starts protesting. You can't do this. You're too great and we're too unworthy. You can't do this. Because that's the dynamic here. You're a rabbi. We're your disciples. You can't legally be doing this. What are you doing? Okay? And Jesus answers him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Peter, let me do this. I'm not going to do it your way. Because then Peter also says, don't just wash my feet, wash my whole body, Lord. Right? Peter's still trying to vie for control and do it Peter's way, not Jesus' way. And Jesus says, no, Peter, you gotta let me do this. Let me do this my way. Okay? It has to be done Jesus' way, not Peter's way. Okay? And then Jesus goes on and gives a very interesting illustration here when Peter asks for his whole body to be cleansed. He taught that there was a difference. Okay? There's a difference between the initial bathing and an ongoing washing. Okay? And that we needed to be bathed first, yes, Peter, but you've already accomplished that step. But there's also a continual foot washing that needs to happen. So he is showing the difference between the initial salvation and the symbol of baptism and a continual everyday walking, because they had to wash their feet every day, right? Okay? So he's trying to show Peter that, okay? The once for all salvation that's getting ready to happen on the cross, but then the everyday walking with me, let me wash your feet, okay? So he's trying to show that to Peter because Peter's going to be the leader. Peter's going to need to remember that. All right, so Jesus' whole life is a lesson, and he's giving all of these examples to the disciples, but he clarifies this one. He says, fellas, do you understand this one? I want to make sure you understand this picture, because they were going to be leaders. They were going to have to go out there and teach everyone else, because it's only the 13 of them in that room. Okay? They were going to have to be the ones to go teach everyone else, and he was not going to let a misunderstanding happen here. Okay? So, as their teacher and Lord, he commands them, I want you to show the same humble sacrifice that I just showed to you, to one another. Okay? This is the example to mark your attitudes and your actions. He's saying, be like me. Okay? Do what I do. Don't just talk the talk, walk the walk, fellas. Okay? So this was and is true for every believer as well. Okay? We don't just need to walk the walk or talk the talk, we need to walk the walk. Okay? So when Jesus chooses a person, he is fully aware of that person's weakness, stupidity, lack of knowledge, arrogance. He factors that all in, so y'all don't have to worry about that. Okay? He doesn't do it despite all of that. He factors all of that into that. Just imagine Peter and Peter's arrogance and selfishness. He factors that into calling Peter. Okay? Alright. So he's also telling them it's no surprise to me what's getting ready to happen to Judas. Okay? He knows.
Some of the disciples had previously been with John the Baptizer.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them had also been baptized, or all of them baptized?
It seems to be from all the accounts together that they've all been baptized.
So Judas,
Yeah.
everybody,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah. And some of them were baptizing others.
Just because reading on there where it says not all of you are clean.
He's talking to Judas. But we're talking about the spiritual cleansing, because remember, the devil's already entered into Judas.
Right.
So he is trying to point out the difference, the goat among the sheep. Yeah. So you can get wet. Don't matter. Or you clean on the inside, right? Judas was just wet. Okay? Alright. So, Jesus then quotes from Psalm 41:9. And we don't really understand the cultural expectation of this. Psalm 41:9 talks about a treacherous, unexpected attack or taking cruel advantage of someone after you have shared a meal. okay? So in that culture, the absolute sign of hostility against someone is that if you shared a meal with them and then they betrayed you, that is the ultimate level of betrayal. You could not betray someone more than after you shared a meal with them and then you went and betrayed them. That's what Judas is getting ready to do. Because he's sitting at that table, sharing a meal with everyone, and he's getting ready to betray them. Not just Jesus, he's getting ready to betray them all. Okay? So, Jesus in this is reminding them, guys, something's getting ready to happen and it's going to blow your minds, but I'm in control. I know exactly what's happening here. Okay? He was the representative to be sent. He wanted to know that Judas and his rejection that he was getting ready to do was not only going to be rejecting his rabbi, but his Messiah and the God who sent him. So he's warning Judas, he is calling Judas, even knowing what's getting ready to happen, he's still laying out the invitation. Judas, I know what you're getting ready to do. He hasn't done it yet. I know what you're getting ready to do. Okay? If you do this, you are going to be rejecting the God who sent me. You're not just rejecting me here. Alright, so knowing what's getting ready to happen, because he is looking Judas in the face. Okay? It troubles Jesus. He loves Judas so much that what is going on inside of Judas is troubling him more than what's getting ready to happen to him in 24 hours. Judas struggling. Judas already making the decision troubles Jesus more than what he's getting ready to face. Okay? He's not unaffected by Judas's troubles here. Okay? Even though he's completely in control. Alright, so verse 23, staying in John 13, verse 23. It says, one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, that's John, okay, was reclining at the table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus, who was he speaking? Of whom was he speaking? So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Okay? So remember, we have a U-shaped setup of tables. They're all kind of reclining, and what you do is you would lay on your stomach, and then you would prop yourself up on your left arm, and you would eat with your right hand. Okay? So that means you're pretty darn close to the guy behind you and the guy in front of you. So John, where he is, remember, he's a teenager, he can lean on Jesus, and he can have a private conversation with him without other people hearing. So Simon Peter's like, hey John, ask him who he's talking about. We don't know who he's talking about. They don't know that it's Judas. Okay? And they might have assumed that he was talking about an accidental, unintentional betrayal. This is to the level that they don't know it's Judas. That they don't see a difference in him amongst everyone else that they spent 3 years with. Okay? So Simon Peter's like, hey John, ask him who it is. And so John leans back and goes, hey Lord, who is it? Which one of us is going to do that? And Jesus says, I'm going to take this piece of bread and I'm going to dip it in the oil. And the one I give this to is the betrayer. And y'all, we do not understand the cultural significance of that moment. Jesus as the host to rip off a piece of bread and to dip it in the oil that was a communal bowl of oil that they would have the herbs in, the bitter herbs representing everything, to dip it and to hand it to someone was the ultimate sign of honor at that table. And he hands it to Judas. Judas takes it and eats it with betrayal in his heart, already having decided what to do, already with the 30 coins in his purse. Okay? He takes that symbol of honor and love from his master and he eats it. Okay?
And then when he said that, like, everybody didn't hear him say, I'm going to do this. Like, did you just...
We don't know.
Oh.
We don't know if
I'd
he
be like,
whispered it
"Don't
to
hold
John,
I'm good.
but John at least heard it.
Okay.
And John didn't stop it. And we wonder if Peter heard it. We wonder if Peter didn't stop it. Or if they were just so blown away they just could not wrap their minds around it actually being true. Okay?
I would think that's probably more of a,
It was such a
what's going
shock.
on here. Yeah,
Why didn't you just hand it to them?
yeah.
What? No, it can't be Judas. What is this happening? What is happening right now? Because he's taken a sign of honor as a symbol for what's getting ready to be betrayed. Y'all, we don't understand the cultural significance of that. Absolute honor that he is handing over to Judas. Okay?
And do they realize the time frame of the betrayal, or just that it's going to happen at some point, not in the next?
They don't know anything.
At that point, I would think they are still maybe in a little bit of shock.
Mm-hmm.
One of us is going to betray you, and
It's
then
going to.
Jesus showing at least John who it is.
Yeah.
It's take a lot of processing.
They
for
don't
me.
understand the extent of the betrayal either.
Right? Right? Because he's not specific here. He's just saying one of you is going to betray me. They're probably not going, oh, Jesus is going to give him over and he's going to be crucified. That's probably nowhere near their minds. Even though Jesus has told them several times, right? All right. So Judas takes the piece of bread, completely firm in his decision, which shows that this is a deliberate choice on Judas's part. He is not being forced or coerced to do anything. This is completely his choice. But taking that piece of bread breaks the barrier. And he's now fully Satan's, because it is intentional betrayal of honor to his rabbi. And Jesus leans over to Judas and he says, what you're going to do, do it quickly. I already know what you're going to do. Go do it. It's time. I'm giving you permission to betray me, because it's time. Can you imagine what's going through Judas' mind? He knows that Messiah. He knows Jesus knows exactly what's on his heart and mind. I'm giving you permission.
Yeah, I'm getting out of Dodge.
And he gets up and he leaves. It says in verse 28 through 30, no one at the table knew what he said to him. Some thought because Judas had the money bag, right? Jesus was telling him to go buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give some of it to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Okay? So the others don't know what Jesus told Judas. They don't know why Judas got up in the middle of dinner and left. They have assumptions. We hear their assumptions. Judas has the money pouch. Maybe Jesus sent him on a little errand. Okay, remember he's always sending people on errands. So maybe, Judas got sent on an errand. But we wonder if they knew, if they would have tried to stop him. If they knew what he was going to do. If any of them would have tried to stop him.
You think John understood in real time?
Probably not. That's probably why we have so much information in John, is because he's had all those years to process what was happening and put all of the pieces together. But he probably at that time had no idea what was happening. So with a taste of Jesus' honor and love on his lips, Judas goes to the religious leaders in the middle of the night and he starts the process to arrest Jesus. Okay? Set the trap for Messiah. Alright, verse 31 says, when he had gone out, Jesus said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also be glorify him in himself, and glorify him at once. Do you think glorify is an important word here? Right? We've said it 5 times. Little children, yet a little while I am with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. And by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. So Judas gets up and leaves. Jesus knows everything is now set in motion. And he makes a reference 5 times to his glory and God's glory. And with good reason. Because everyone else who looks at the cross sees disgrace and humiliation and cursings, but he knew at the end of it, it was going to glorify God. So he was trying to help them realize what was going to happen. I know what you're going to see, but I'm telling you it's going to result in God's glory. Okay? And then he calls these 11 little children, but it's not an insult. It's not a derogatory term. It's actually a term of love and endearment. He's saying, fellas, I love you so much. Guys, come on. He tells them he's only going to be with them a little while longer. He's actually got a 24-hour time stamp on him, okay? I'm only going to be with you a little longer, and where I'm going, you can't come. Which would have been devastating for them to hear because they left everything. They've been following him, literally following him for 3 years. And he says, where I'm getting ready to go, you can't come with me. Can't come with me. Okay? And Jesus gives them a fresh command. I want you guys to love one another as I have shown you love. Okay? This is going to be the mark of who you are. He doesn't say, love me. Love me with all of your heart. Even though that's assumed, that's where you start. He's saying, fellas, the way that they're going to know if you love me is if you love each other the same way. Okay? This is the new commandment that I'm going to give you. Still true for us today. Alright, so let's jump to Matthew 26 and the last little bit here for today. Matthew 26, verse 26. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to the disciples. And he said, take, eat, this is my body. And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink it, all of you, for this is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin. I tell you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. Okay, so this is the Passover. Okay, this is what they would do. Everything that was eaten on that table had a symbolic meaning that they were incredibly aware of because they did this every year. Okay, this was a tradition. They knew everything. You would tell the story of the Exodus. You would have specific questions that were asked and answered. So they knew this. Jesus mixes it up a little bit here. He's going to change the symbols. Okay? So every part of this meal was symbolic. Okay, so let's talk about the symbols. The bitter herbs were called the bitterness of slavery, and they were often mixed with salt water to mimic tears. Okay, you had to eat it. Bitter herbs and salt water. You had to put it in your mouth, and if you cried, that was great, because then you were crying and weeping for what had happened. Okay. The sacrificed lamb was the sin sacrifice of the lambs that had to die that night. And they take the blood and they would put it on the post of their door. Very symbolic, okay? And the blood is spilt for the judgment, to allow the judgment of God to pass over. That's where we get passed over, okay? For everyone who believed and obeyed. So every bit of it is symbolic, okay? So when typically you would lift up the bread during Passover, this is what the host would say. This is the bread of affliction, which our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. Let everyone who hungers come and eat. Let everyone who is needy come and eat the Passover meal. So that is a call. Everyone is welcome at the meal. Okay? Everyone can come. This is Jesus saying, this is what I'm doing too. I am calling all to me. Okay? So, during the Passover, there would also be 4 different wine cups that would be poured. And these were in reference to the I will statements from Exodus 6, verses 6 and 7. So God gives his people 4 I will statements. This is God speaking. I will do these 4 things for you. So then they would pour cups of wine during the meal. This meal lasted hours. Okay, this was a Baptist meal. All right, this would last hours. This was not 30 minutes in and out. This was hours long that they would sit and eat, okay? So the first cup that was poured is the cup of sanctification. And God said, I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, okay? Cup number 2 is the cup of deliverance. I will rescue you from their bondage. Cup number 3, the cup of redemption. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And cup 4 is the cup of praise. I will take you as my people. Okay? So sanctification, I will bring you out from the burdens of Egypt. Deliverance, I will rescue you from their bondage. Redemption, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And praise, I will take you as my people. So every time they lifted up these specific cups, they would remember those statements from God. Okay? But Jesus didn't give the typical explanation of these cups and of the foods. He reinterprets the symbol for himself and what he's getting ready to do. Okay? He was shifting their focus because Passover was to look back, to remember what happened in the Exodus so they didn't go back to that. Remember your history so you don't repeat it. Okay? That was the whole point of that. And God is saying that. Jesus is saying, I want you to shift now to what I'm getting ready to do. And for us, we again look back at what was getting ready to happen. But for those 11 disciples, it was, I'm getting ready to do something. Here's your symbols. You'll remember once it's all done. Okay? So, he's changing the meaning of the symbols that were already in place. The bread would no longer symbolize the haste that they had to leave, the rushing that they had to do to get out of Egypt. But it would be the broken and sinless body of our Lord, because there was no leaven. Leaven equals sin. No leaven, no sin. Sinless body of our Lord. And they would break it. They would literally break it. It was more of like a cracker wafer sort of vibe, instead of like bread like we think of. And they would break it into pieces and pass it around. Okay? The cup of redemption, the third cup, is what he raises here. Would no longer symbolize just God redeeming Israel, but redeeming everyone, all of humanity. Do you remember what the third statement is? God says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. Jesus is turning the symbol around. Because God told Israel, I will redeem you. I am the one getting involved in your situation. It is my divine hand that is coming into your situation. And Jesus is taking the same symbol and saying, my outstretched arms will redeem you. Okay? This is the cup that he raises as the New Testament. The cup of his blood in the New Testament. This is the third cup. Okay? God in flesh offering them that cup. A new covenant. Just as God did with Israel in the wilderness. So if we combine all of the 4 accounts together, it seems as though Jesus, the cup that he passes on, is the 4th cup. Typically, once you finished your meal, you had the 4th cup and you sang the last psalms and you went on your way. They would sing psalms all the way throughout, but they would sing the final one. This cup he lifts, the cup of praise. I will take you as my people. And he doesn't drink from it. He lets them drink from it, but he doesn't drink from it. He sets it down and he says, I'm not going to drink from this one yet. Okay? Because he is looking forward to the future banquet where all of his people will be gathered. Okay? I will take you as my people. All of his people haven't been gathered yet. So he has set aside that cup of praise. But he will drink it in Revelation 19:9 at the marriage supper of the Lamb. That's when his final people will all be gathered together to enjoy the final Passover meal at a wedding banquet. And Jesus will lift the cup of praise and say, I will take you as my people, and drink from that final cup.